Good. So welcome everyone to this evening. It's been a while since we've gotten together, and I hope everybody is doing as well as can be. And we'll study a little Zohar tonight, and that'll be, I hope, something positive. Let's take our prayer so that we can recite that together. Together. Master of all worlds,
highest
power,
in your
presence,
one
source of strength, love, and you have been for our
ancestors.
We very humbly
acknowledge
you.
what are we?
What is our life that you have done such great kindness to us?
Therefore,
Therefore, we place our appeals before you,
that you may forgive
so
and
that
absolve us
you
all
all
our
our
faults,
faults,
that our faults never
let our
be
faults never become a barrier between us and you.
and may it be your desire
to
prepare our hearts.
Our hearts feel awe and love for you.
May you listen
You listen to these words of ours.
ours.
May you open our encumbered hearts through the mysteries of your Torah.
May
May
this
this
May this our
source
study.
of pleasure
before you
your throne of glory
May you shower down upon us the light of our souls in all the way in which we define ourselves.
May the spark of your
May
Holy
the spark of your Holy
Who
Servant,
have revealed these
through whom
words,
you have revealed these words to the world, shine and sparkle.
may their merit
Their merit, their ancestors' merit,
merit
and the merit of their Torah, their innocence and their holiness,
and for us
and for us is to prevent us from stumbling when we study you.
These words.
in their merit. Our eyes be illumined
May our eyes be illumined by what we study,
and saying of
in the saying of the sweet singer of
open
Israel.
my eyes.
Open eyes that I may gaze into the wonders of your Torah.
May the word
May the words of my mouth and the thoughts of my heart be acceptable to you, my rock and my redeemer.
for
It is the Eternal who grants wisdom. It is from his mouth that knowledge and understanding issue forth.
na 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 Good. We're on page 259. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Let's nod your head. Okay, good. I don't want to cover up my mic here. I don't know what I'm doing here. We're on page 259.
Wow, that's a commitment.
Okay, and I'd like to ask everybody else at this point to mute themselves. When you have something to say, you'll raise your hand or you'll unmute yourself and you start speaking, and that would be wonderful. So I'm going to ask you to mute yourselves.
I'm not going to do that.
There's at the bottom. Take your cursor and push it toward the bottom of your screen, and then you should get a white band that comes up that has a picture of a microphone and a camera and a telephone or whatever, something like that. Yes, has that happened?
Not yet.
Okay, click your
okay.
Okay, and then you click the microphone and it mutes.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Koach. So we're at the concluding part of this opening that started back on a page before on 257 with Rabbi Chia, and he begins talking about a verse, Mi Yamalel Gvurot Hashem Yashmiya Kol Tilato. Right? Who can express the mighty acts of the Eternal and declare or to declare or declare all his praise? So that's his starting verse from Psalms, and then he goes into a discussion, a very beautiful, I think, discussion of the development of the Torah, and he talks about the great mysteries that are enfolded within the Torah. He has the story he has of a primordial Torah that then lays the groundwork for the creation of the world, and then becomes part of the world, and most especially, it becomes part of the people of Israel. Right? It calls out to the human being to engage in her. Whoever engages in the Torah sustains the world. And of course, from the Zohar's perspective, this, in the end, is the lot that befalls the people of Israel. And by engaging actively in the Torah here, you can't hear me? Can everybody else hear me? Okay, I don't know, Merrill, I don't know why you can't hear me. By engaging in the Torah, we are making the Torah come alive. We're making Torah by engaging in Torah, and that in itself makes the world live and sustains the world. And clearly, just by that claim, we understand that the Torah has not just a reality that is limited to the text of the Torah or to this discussion or that discussion. The Torah is some kind of vital, living, cosmic reality that suffuses the world, but in particular ways. And we get toward the end of that previous page, 258. Within Torah abide all supernal sealed mysteries. So, and this is part of the primordial roots of the Torah, the part of the Torah that where it derives from, which is beyond the human limitations, that or the material limitations of the world that human beings live in, and all things of this world, all things of the world that is coming, abide within the Torah. And that is this idea that who can possibly unpack all of this? Who can express the mighty acts of the Eternal or declare all his praise? Now, the word mighty acts in Hebrew is gvurot, mi yamalel gvurot Hashem. Some people here might remember a Hanukkah song, mi yamalel gvurot Yisrael otan mi yimneh. So that's a Hanukkah celebratory song, and it was consciously written to take God's name out and to put Israel's name in, who can retell all of the wonderful, mighty acts of Israel, because it was a secularization of this verse. The verse it says no, the mighty acts are God's acts. So who can retell the mighty acts of God? So in the Hanukkah story, the mighty acts are wars and victory and so on. But what the Zohar is talking about, the mighty acts of God are existence itself, and bringing existence into being through this emanative process, that a chain of being that starts from the most mysterious Torah source, that we're using the word Torah and we don't even know what we're talking about. And then it finds its way step by step into this world, and makes the world possible and vivifies the world. But that process is not simply a one-way process. We already had before that it assumes the possibility of tshuva. It assumes the possibility of return, of coming back into that originating pure place, because otherwise it would be a mistake, as the angels claimed against God. It would be a mistake to bring the Torah into this awful, humanly corrupted world. It would just be desecrated and destroyed. It would not be able to be a source of life for the world. The answer is, said God, no, but that's what it is. There's a back and forth here. There is the possibility of coming back into that pure place, of coming back into the primordial Torah. The sources of the Torah themselves, which are always rooted and hiding in the Torah that we have in its most obvious forms. And then we had this distinction made between Solomon and David, where Solomon thought he could understand all of the mysteries of the Torah because he thought he was so smart. He was the smartest man alive, right? He was the wisest of all human beings. Nevertheless, he tripped up in living a life of Torah because he didn't understand that this was not simply something that was encapsulated or encompassed by human wisdom. And David represents the one who understands that there are mysteries. David is the one who says, "Ga'aleinai v'yabita niflot mitoratecha." The verse that we say in our opening prayer, "Open my eyes so that I may gaze at the wonders in your Torah." There are wonders, there are mysteries, there are niflaot, there are things that are beyond my comprehension. Let me somehow grasp them. Let me somehow see them. Let me somehow open my eyes, unroll my eyes, roll my eyes open so that I can see those mysteries. So when we got to 259, we had this comparison between the mysteries of the Torah versus the mysteries of human creative products. And Solomon writes all of these amazing literary works, which have so many layers of meaning. And then the Zohar says, so you can imagine what kind of layers of meaning there are in the Torah, which is not of human authorship, but is of divine authorship. So that's the conclusion of this kind of celebratory prose poem to the Torah itself and to Torah's place as the life force coming from God, and then finding its way through all kinds of complicated steps into our our Google Hangout session right now, as we're here together. So who can express the mighty acts of God? That this is what has happened. So there's a tremendous, there's a tremendous message that is being put out here in the most basic and profound way about how reality comes to be and how reality keeps on going. And all of these very profound mysteries are labeled mysteries of the Torah. So it's a very high kind of message and statement. Now we come to the second paragraph on page 259, and I think this is basically where we left off. What's going to happen is, as in so many other rabbinic homilies that were created for thousands of years, and the Zohar is simply part of that tradition, we take a general statement that comes out of some other place, and now we apply it to the text in front of us. And the text in front of us is from the beginning of Toldot, the beginning of this new Torah portion, right? So the beginning of our Torah portion starts in the middle of chapter 24 in Genesis, and 25 in Genesis, I'm sorry. And it says, Ve'ela toldot Yitzchak ben Avraham, Avraham holidet Yitzchak. And these are the story, the generations, the history, the genealogy. The word toldot has many, many, many translations. Of Isaac, the son of Abraham. Abraham begat Isaac, right? So that first verse is now being finally summoned, and it's brought in the wake of this explanation of how deep and profound the words of the Torah are, how they suggest, or how they can be opened up to see beyond the simple words of the Torah. I want to just also point out, before we get to this paragraph, the Zohar and other places, and we've had it before, talks about garments of the Torah, levushim or malbushim, and those are layers, right? Layers that cover up something that's underneath. So everything in this world requires a malbush. Everything in this world requires some kind of protective covering. To use a terrible example, the reason that we wash our hands during this pandemic is that with the hot water and the soap, we break the protective covering of the virus, and then the virus can't survive anymore. Right? It's got an external shell. It's got an external cover, and that's an oily kind of cover, and then the soap breaks it down. I think that's sort of pretty much basically correct. I'm looking for Craig to just sort of nod your head. Thank you. Okay, good. In our weekly Torah portion that we're coming to on Shabbat, we have another discussion about malbushim, about coverings, and we have layers and layers of coverings. We have the home that we live in, that covers us up, that shelters us. Then we have our clothing that we put on top of our bodies. And then we have our body itself. Our skin is considered a kind of a cloak over our innards. When I'm not just talking about our innards in the physical way, but we understand it traditionally as the soul is enclosed and garbed by the physical reality that we're in. In a certain sense, the Torah is like that. And of course, in the Torah portion, we talk about the breaking, the degradation of those malbushim, the degradation of those surfaces, of those garments by the disease or the affliction. It's not a medical disease, called tzaraat. So we talked about that earlier this evening in our Torah study. What's called leprosy. It's not leprosy, but that's the way everybody conveniently talks about it, where the skin breaks out in scabs and sores and oozing, and our clothes begin to have all kinds of disgusting stains on them, and then even our homes, the walls of our homes get that as well. So we're not going to talk about all of that, but those are why that happens. But those are the garments, those are the enclosures, the encasements, right? The way that we are encased, and each one of those things is to protect something inside of it, right? Is to protect something that the casing covers up. And the Zohar says it so many times. That's the necessity of this world. Nothing can exist in this world in a transparent, exposed way completely. No matter how exposed we might be, we are always encased by something. If we walk around stark naked, we are encased by our bodies. So the we, whoever the we is, that soul, that being, that essential being, had to come into this world with some kind of physical protection. And so it is with the Torah. The Torah also needed to, if it would be existing in this world, it would need to exist through protective layers. So and we've talked about this again many times, but it's still worth revisiting. How much are the layers part of what they are layering over? How much can you distinguish between the layers and the inside of the being, the thing, the creature, the human being that we're talking about? So, the clothes that we wear, theoretically, we all know we can take them off and we can put them on, and then their relationship to us is also fluid. How much do we consider our own clothes essential to who we are? How much do we need to pick our clothes? How much do our clothes, even though they're obviously not, my clothes are not my soul, but if the clothes are something that I pick, in what way are the clothes a hint about my soul? Right? A totalitarian approach to human beings is to make sure that they do not have distinctive clothing. Right? So there are uniforms that people have to wear, and that is part of degrading their essence. Why? Clothes are totally separate from who you are? The answer is no. The clothes really do have, in some way, when they are your clothes, in some way they betray or they express some aspect of who you are. So even the most exterior shell conveys and it participates in some way with your very being. And if you're a good observer of these things, you can figure that out a little bit. But what you figure out by doing that is both an appreciation of the shell and then a going beyond the shell, right? Of what it reveals, right? And that's the paradox that the Zohar loves to engage in. How the concealment can be revelatory. How the material that conceals can itself be a vehicle for revelation, for showing us, for revealing to us, for teaching us something that's underneath. And that's the way the Zohar reads the Torah, right? Even the most prosaic, the most mundane aspects of the Torah, the writing, the shape of the letters, the material reality of a Torah, even that, as it's traditionally mandated, can give us a little clue, right? A little insight into the deepest aspects of the Torah. And then there are other malbushim. Then there's not simply the shape of the letters and the material reality of a Torah scroll and so on. There's the text as it's read. So we read a story. We read a story that Abraham took his son and went up to the mountain. So it's a drama. It's a story, but it's not just a story. It's a story that, as a story, should be revelatory. But part of what it's going to reveal is not on the surface. Part of what it's going to reveal, if we learn how to be connoisseurs of reading the Torah, then we can go a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper. So this is the model that the Zohar in many places presents to us. The literally, in other places, the striptease of the Torah, right? The idea of appreciating a certain garmenting, engarbment of the Torah, and then being able or allowed, the way that the image is presented, the Torah then allows you to see her by dropping one of her shells, one of her garments, and then you see more of the Torah. And then you realize that's simply a garment too, and there's actually more underneath, and so on and so on and so on. So these are the mysteries that are supposed to entice us. The mystery should awaken our curiosity, our spiritual curiosity, and even regular curiosity is, in a certain sense, a kind of a garment for spiritual yearning. And then, hopefully, we can go deeper and deeper, or higher and higher. It's the same. It's the same idea. It's the same idea. So that's what we are invited to do in general. So now let's see. This is a big, big build-up. And now let's see what this big build-up, concludes with. Here's an example. Rabbi Chia says, here's an example of doing that. Okay, so we're at come and see what is written above. So we're on 259, the second paragraph. And as always, I would love to have somebody do us the honor of reading it out loud for us. Ian, Gail is volunteering you.
Okay. No.
You have to unmute yourself. Although I actually heard you say okay, so I don't know how that happened.
I strongly believe that people should only volunteer themselves, but okay, I'll read this paragraph. Come and see what is written above. These are the generations of Ishmael, namely 12 princes. Afterward, scripture states, these are the generations of Isaac. You might imagine that since Ishmael engendered 12 princes, whereas Isaac engendered 2 sons, this one ascended and that one did not. So it is written, who can express Gebarot, the mighty acts of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh? Isaac, who engendered Jacob and Esau. Isaac generated Jacob, who singly surpassed them all, engendering 12 tribes, sustaining above and below. For Isaac above in supernal holiness, Esau below. So it is written, who can express the mighty acts of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, or declare all his praise? Jacob. When the sun cleaves to the moon, countless stars radiate from them.
Okay. Well done. Thank you, Gail. So, to bring this whole introduction now to bear on reading our section in the Torah, what Rabbi Chia says is, so this verse that's in front of us, Ve'ele Toldot Yitzchak ben Abraham, this is the story, these are the generations of Isaac. In order to appreciate that, you have to see what's written above that. So just a few verses before that, Toldot, as I said, begins at chapter 25, verse 19. So 8 verses earlier, you have in verse 12 of the same chapter, but it's the previous Torah reading. Ve'ele Toldot Yishmael ben Avraham. And these are the generations of Ishmael, the son of Abraham. And then it continues, Asher Yalda Hagar HaMitzrit, Shivchat Sarah LeAvraham, who was given birth to by Hagar, the Egyptian, who was the maidservant of Sarah for Abraham. So there are key similarities, and there are key differences between these two verses. And Rabbi Chia calls them to our attention so that we can lay them out in front of us. And we have Eila Toldot Yishmael and Eila Toldot Yitzchak ben Avraham. Very, very, very similar. So the way he now proceeds is, come and see what is written above. And the next verses, these are the generations of Yishmael, end up listing 12 different Nesiim, 12 different heads of tribes or princes that Ishmael was the patriarch for, right? So afterwards, scripture states, these are the generations of Isaac. the beginning of our Torah portion. So he says, if you read this in a straightforward manner, then you might imagine that since Ishmael engendered 12 princes, whereas Isaac engendered 2, this one ascended and that one did not. So we've got a little, rivalry being set up here, a little bit of a judgment that we might be making. And he says, if you just read the Torah straightforwardly, then Ishmael certainly seems to have attained higher heights than Isaac, and seems to have been, if we want to put God into the picture, blessed by God, favored by God, because after all, look at that. He's got that magic number of tribes. He's got 12 tribes to speak of. He's got 12 princes, and not just sons, but princes. They're called alufim, right? Nesiim, right? So princes. So, and yet, when Isaac succeeds in having children, he only has 2, and they're not called princes at all. So both numerically and in terms of quality, it seems that Ishmael has certainly surpassed his brother Isaac. So if you just looked at the way things operated in the world, that's the conclusion that you would come to. So it is written, who can express gvurot Hashem? Who can express the mighty acts of the Eternal? Yitzchak, who engendered Jacob and Esau. So the word gvurot, as I mentioned before, is mighty acts. Gvura means might. Gvura means, in the Zoharic vocabulary, about talking about God's aspects. Gvura is God's judgment, God's forceful delineation of everything that's happening, and limitation, and all of the fearsome aspects of God. And Yitzchak is traditionally identified with that aspect of God, while his father Abraham, of course, is identified with unbounded love, and Yitzchak is the binding. The binding of Isaac for the Zohar means that Isaac is the one who binds, not Abraham. Isaac is the one who binds. So on the one hand, it looks like Yitzchak is really secondary and Ishmael is the favored one. No, if you understand that these are Gvurot Hashem, then we understand that Yitzchak is really the one who is attached to the Eternal and not Ishmael. So we have that verse. We need that verse from Psalms to unpack for us that there is a mystery here, that there is not simply the surface understanding of the phenomenon, the happenings of history, the happenings of the world. There's something hidden underlying it, which is different, which defies our more obvious, superficial kinds of calculations. Yitzchak engendered Jacob and Esau. Okay, so now what's the big deal about that? What's so good about engendering these two? After all, they're less than 12. 2 is less than 12. Number 2, they're not called Nesiim. So what's so good about it? The answer is the word Gvurot is plural, right? It doesn't say Gvurat Hashem, God's might. It says God's mights, God's mighty acts or mighty deeds or mighty aspects in the plural. And plural is 2. So Yitzchak creates more Gvura. Yitzchak creates in his essence as Gvura, he creates 2 aspects of Gvura. One is Jacob and one is Esau. So even though numerically Ishmael has a lot more sons, and even though in in the social political realities of their time. They were more famous and they were more honored and they were considered princes. But that's all on the mundane level, on the prosaic worldly level. But the two sons of Yitzchak are special. The two sons of Yitzchak are more than just humanly successful examples. What do they exemplify? Who are they? So now we get into the darker part of the way this is looked at. Isaac generated Jacob, who singly surpassed them all, engendering 12 tribes. So there, thankfully, we get a corresponding, a balancing out of Ishmael's 12. Jacob does the 12 also, sustaining above and below. Right? But Isaac above in supernal holiness, Esav below. And Esav is below. So Isaac is above, Esav is below. If you look at note 12, what do you got? Ian, back to you. Gail, can you please poke him?
Yeah, she's poking. Who can express the mighty acts of the Eternal? Isaac. Isaac symbolizes Gevurah, power and might. And he engendered both Jacob and Esau, holy and demonic respectively.
Okay. So the point of the Zohar is that Ishmael's sons are all very nice, but they're here today and gone tomorrow. Jacob and Esav are cosmic forces. Jacob and Esav are moral and cosmic realities. Jacob is the offspring of a divine emanative process and is representative of all the holy force that can be brought into this world. And Esav is also no slouch. Esav is begotten by Yitzchak. Yitzchak, who dwells in the divine. And yet Esav is below. Esav is the demonic. Esav is the representative of the forces of evil. For the Zohar, this is the labeling that they use. This is the name that they have. And, I sort of, introduced this in a certain way. I have to say that when you read this, when I read it the first time, I was really disappointed. I mean, I had a really wonderful, exciting journey through the whole description of the Torah and the Torah's becoming real in this world. I was very inspired. Then when I get to this paragraph, it felt so small to me. It felt really like a real, literally, to use like a letdown. I was up in the high spheres. I was feeling an appreciation for the immense complexity and the immense richness of the Torah. And then what I have here is a kind of a really, down to earth, competition, a judgment of rejection of this and a celebration of that, this group versus that group. So personally, I'm just honestly speaking, I report to you that it was a letdown to first read this verse. If this is an example of looking into the mysteries of the Torah, then it was a pretty disappointing revelatory experience. So I want to acknowledge that, and I don't know if other people are feeling that or struggling with that at all. So I don't see anybody raising their hand or anything like that. But I think that the Zohar is not so easily dismissed, at least not by me. What the Zohar ends up talking about with this kind of disturbing or seemingly small-minded preoccupations that it has, and of course we can unpack those. Historically, this is a Jewish text that is fighting against both Islam and the church, and trying to assert itself, and stand proud against a lot of oppression and denigration. So all of that is operative here for sure. But if we want to go through those malbushim, through those garments, down to something else that's maybe hidden underneath, that's actually giving substance to those garments, that makes, that we've used it with the example, the invisible man, right? In order to make the invisible man visible, they wrap him up, or he puts on a coat, and all of a sudden you can see where he is, right? From those old movies. The coat takes on the shape of the invisible man. So the coat reveals the shape by taking the shape, or the bandages reveal the shape of the hidden that's underneath. Similarly, these kinds of stories that are maybe not so inspirational are actually garments for a difficult truth, maybe, if I could be so bold. Something that we touched on many times, and that the Zohar touches on many times, maybe all the time. And that is what is in the end, and we'll never get to the end, but how do we think about the relationship between what is good in the world and what is bad in the world? How do we think about how those two are related if they all come from some pure, amazing, primordial source of divinity in all of the garments? If you put a garment on a pure soul, how can that garment in the end turn that pure soul into something other than being a pure soul? Every morning in the traditional prayers, we say, Elokai neshama shenatata bi tohurai. My God, the soul that you have given me is absolutely pure. There's nothing I can do to besmirch my soul. I can do all kinds of terrible things, but it doesn't touch my essence, my soul. My soul is from you. So my soul can't be broken down and washed away. There are garments around my soul that can be donned or not, that can be torn or stained or embellished in a beautiful way. But my soul is inviolate. My soul is pure and simple, just pure. So how does it get to be, though, that then there's so much awfulness in this world that comes out of a place of just golden holiness? And by telling this story, or by giving this exegesis, the Zohar doesn't answer the question, but the Zohar affirms the question, right? The Zohar, by using these labels, which may or may not be politically correct, but by using these labels, the Zohar is acknowledging that there's an integral genealogical connection between what is holy and what is demonic or profane or impure or non-holy in its essence. And that's a real mystery. So when the Zohar says, who can imagine that? Who can comprehend that? Right? Who can express Gvurot Hashem? And then they say, what does that mean? Who can express Gvurot Hashem? This is God's Gvurot And God's Gvurot are both Jacob and Esav. Both Jacob and Esav, which in my pure, puny mind, I consider that a statement that leads to equality. Both Jacob and Esav are God's children. Right? When we say things like that, we're saying that in a kind of a celebratory, inclusive way. And yet the Zohar doesn't mean it that way at all, because Esav is bad. Esav is down, is low. Jacob is up, is good. So even if we want to take away the ethnic and the religious and the national and the whatever other kinds of categories we want to apply, all of those other malbushim, all of those other garments, what the Zohar is saying is take away all those garments. Doesn't matter. There's something called goodness and there's something called evil, and they are God's children. They are the product of God's might. That's what seems to me to be the underlying statement that is being given these kinds of malbushim. And in that respect, that is as difficult a truth as all the other things that were said before about the Torah and how it found its way down into the world. And in that respect, it's a kind of a reality check too. We had a kind of a happy answer before when the angel said, God, what the heck are you doing? And they said, human beings are going to ruin your world. And at that point, we don't have the same theological radical problem, because we're sort of assuming that we can separate out the source of evil, human beings. The source of good is God. God gives all this wonderful stuff, and then the human beings mess it up. And then God says, okay, but we have tshuva. So, and again, we talked about it a lot. But now when we have this, what we're saying is you can't be so easy in making the distinction of where the bad stuff comes from. It ends up that, even the bad stuff is not human beings' fault per se. It is the product of God creating the world the way God created it. Yeah, Mark.
I was talking to a mutual friend of ours. I was talking to Menachem, and I told him the trouble that I have with Torah. And he said that, at least in Lurianic Kabbalah, there's a Torah from the tree of good and evil, but there's also a Torah from the tree of life. And the Torah from the tree of good and evil is the Torah that we have, that presents the world in terms of good and evil. But the Torah that's the blueprint of reality, he's described as the Torah of life. And he couldn't go into detail with me, I'm an ignoramus. But I wonder if you have ever heard of this concept of the Torah of the tree of life.
Yeah. So he, what Mark is mentioning is a real scholar of Kabbalah that we both know in different kinds of ways, and that's a whole story in and of itself, not for today. He lives in Israel, and so I was in communication with him by coincidence. Also, I just was checking up on him and seeing how he was doing. He said he had this little conversation with you. And he was surprised that I hadn't clarified all of this for you. Well, we have different approaches on how to deal with things, Menachem and I. The Torah of the Tree of Life is not something that Rabbi Yitzchak Luria thought of, with all the awe of his system. Rabbi Yitzchak Luria is from the 16th century, about 300 years after the Zohar. And he is the greatest Kabbalist after the Zohar. And his teachings and his system are very, very, very complex and profound. And they come out of the Zohar, and many people see him as the greatest expositor and the one who actually reveals the depths of the Zohar in the greatest possible way. But he didn't invent those terms. He didn't invent those concepts. They come out of the Zohar itself. And we have touched on it before, and in fact, that's part of what this myth is about. What the beginning myth of this section of Toldot is exactly that, is talking about this very pure, very transcendent Torah that is God's own essence, but then has to somehow come down to earth. And as it comes down to earth, it's conditioned, it's qualified, it's transformed. And we've talked about that actually many times. I just don't like to use, first of all, I don't like to use Lurianic terminology in general for some other conversation. And second of all, I don't think it's necessary at this point either to do that, but obviously it was. It helped you see the distinction better. The difficulty of that is, and this is where I would sort of push a little bit, the imagery of a Torah from the tree of life and a Torah from the tree of good and evil. And I think we have, again, we've touched upon this more than once. The possible difficulty is to actually think of them as two separate Torahs. They're not. They're one Torah. The tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil, in the end, underneath all of those stories, it's the same tree. And that's why this text is worthwhile to take as it speaks, because it talks about that Torah as it filters down, as it trickles down from that most ineffable, incomprehensible purity that's prior to all space and time, as it trickles down into the quarantine of the world, right? The Torah is in quarantine. The Torah is stuck in this world. It used to be completely free. It used to be completely unfettered. It used to be completely unbounded, to the extent that we, when we talk about God and we talk about Ein Sof, it's that kind of undifferentiated, pure, simple, clean reality. But the Torah came down to the earth. It's the same Torah, just like it's the same God. I've talked about God transforming God's self to be a creator God and to be an engaged God in this world. But God forbid, so to speak, we should not get into the Gnostic, dualism. There's not this God and that God. There's not this Torah and that Torah, ultimately. So the terms that he's using and talking about as Lurianic terms come from more esoteric parts, if there's such a thing, in the Zohar, the Idrot, and we haven't gotten anywhere near them. And that's okay as far as I'm concerned. But I don't think we need to, when we get to them, when we're like 150 years old and we've actually made it to that part of the Zohar, maybe we'll be prepared to go, oh, so that's what it meant back here in volume 2 of Matt's edition and so on. I think that we've been touching upon this, again and again and again. And I think that talking about a Torah of the tree of life as distinct is, number one, a mistake, and number two, I think it begs the question. It begs the question of what are we talking about here when we talk about this world and the Torah that we have in this world, and what the courage, as I see it, the courage of the Zohar here in saying this very on the one hand, factually trivial statement, and yet by couching it the way it does, it transforms that into the most disturbing and the most challenging statement. Isaac gave birth to Jacob and Esau. Totally true. Totally prosaic, totally uninteresting, if unless you've never heard the Bible stories before. Isaac as God engendering holiness and the demonic, that's a challenging statement. And that is, the way that the Zohar wants to preserve the unity of God and not separate it out into a dualistic concept. Oh, here's the good source and here's the bad source. Eventually there is a dualism. We're in the world of separation, Alma de Peruda. The world that we know of is a world of multiplicity. It's a world of differentiation. It's a world of making a difference. It's a world of seeing differences, and it's a world of contrast, for better or for worse. Every category of thought that we have exists within that sense of duality. What the Zohar says is that duality does not reflect an ultimate reality of dualism, but it comes out in some kind of mysterious way. It comes out of a union. It comes out of a oneness, and yet that oneness is all good. That's the paradox that the Zohar insists upon again and again and again. And that's where the Torah of the tree of life is supposed to be standing for that. But what I'm trying to say is, I said it now probably multiple times, too many times, the Torah of the tree of life is not to be cut off from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Does that respond to what you're thinking about?
Well, unfortunately, I had a horrible experience on Holocaust Remembrance Day. I saw 2 episodes of the movie The Four Sisters. I don't know if you know about that. The guy who did the 9-hour movie on the Shoah, he had 4 hours of outtakes.
Lanzmann.
Yeah, he had 4 hours of outtakes. And I've been sick in my heart ever since. So now I'm back to the thing you accused me of many months ago, of being the guy in your old Zohar class who jumped up every minute and said, what about the Holocaust? Because the thing that this one woman describes was so unbelievably horrible. I won't talk about it. So unbelievably horrible that I was so happy that I had talked to Menachem, because it gave me the possibility of being, a Gnostic, of trying to separate that level of horror from the essence of, the blueprint of the world. So unfortunately, you just throw it right back in my face. So
I may be coming from the demonic side. You just have to put me off in my, in a different kind of category, and just move on, and it'll be okay. It's your fault, because you chose to watch the wrong movie on Yom HaShoah. What you should have watched was Zelda's movie, and then you would have had a more unified sense of what was going on. Because Zelda's movie is a miraculous. I mean, it's not because it's Zelda's, but there are miraculous. Thank you. I'll tell her. There are miraculous. I mean, it doesn't. I don't want to. God forbid. I don't want to ever mitigate, belittle, excuse, find any kind of way of taking away the inexpressible dimensions of the horror that you're referring to, which you don't have to give examples. Unfortunately, too many of us have been exposed to those stories and to that reality. I don't want to ever put that into some kind of like cushy, context. The miracle of that movie, and everything I'm going to say is going to be some kind of like stupid cliche. Is that, as I was thinking about it afterwards, and I've seen it a couple of times, so much of that movie was love stories that were happening in the midst of what you're talking about. And so I'm being a little flip when I say you should watch the other movie. I just don't think that we can separate them out. I think that we're stuck with the mix and the union of that mix, and that's the problem. And that's the Zohar faced it, and the choice that the Zohar makes has nothing to do with proving something, and it's not neat. The problem of the other way. I mean, look. So what am I gaining by saying it's not neat? I don't know, but I can't go there. I mean, I wish maybe that I could. I would have had a lot easier time of things. I can't see it that way, but I hear what you're saying. I hear. Any other comments now?
Rabbi.
Where are you? Rich.
Yeah. So is the Zohar even saying in this specific case that that Esau and Jacob are pure good and pure evil, or as we've had before, aren't they? It's a blend, or is it a blend? Right.
So this depends on which layer you're looking at. This is where I think it depends on reading the human stories, or then going down into or going up into the realms of symbol and theory. And I want to also say that that's a precarious journey in and of itself, because starting again, when you read the stories, and every once in a while the Zohar makes these breakthroughs, I've tried to highlight them sometimes, of seeing the mix, that Esau is not pure evil, right? That to acknowledge that there's plenty of quote unquote humanity in Esau. That's on the plane of plane, on the plane of human living. That's required. It's absolutely required to embrace a person in their full humanity. But then there are possibilities of using human actors in history as representatives of some concept or some value or some kind of essence of reality. When we talk about Hitler, Yamach Shemo, may his name be erased. What do we say? Do we say that Hitler was pure evil? I think a lot of us would be comfortable saying that. And yet, there are people who love, certain kind of anti-Semites or Holocaust deniers or provocateurs. So some people who actually love to bring up a certain kind of truth, which is that Hitler was a human being. And Hitler had relationships, and he had people who loved him, and that he loved he loved his dogs. He had mistresses. He had a life. How horrible is that to contemplate that this is a man who was just like you and me, and yet somehow or other he really, really, really comes as close as you can possibly come to becoming the exemplar. If Abraham is Chesed and Yitzchak is Gevura, then that Hitler is that demonic essence. So you have to keep on working on different layers, and most of the time we don't have to make that kind of leap. Most of the time we can stay in a more easy to handle realm. And when we do reduce people to abstractions, we are literally taking away their humanity. And then the question is, when is that legitimate? Is it legitimate with Hitler? So for the Zohar, Esav presents a similar kind of example. Esav as Esav was a human being. And Esav, in fact, was a person who had a lot of good qualities in terms of his taking care of his father. And this goes back to Midrashim that see these good qualities of Esav. But when Esav is stripped of that humanity and becomes a sign, becomes a symbol of something else, he becomes something that's transhistorical. He becomes the symbol of the demonic, which is not, somebody that lives in Esav's skin. It's the force that's out there throughout time, again and again, in different places in the world, of being cruel and murderous and so on. How much of that is in the Bible story? Very, 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 very little. Almost nothing. Esav became that symbol. And as a symbol, if we again try to keep them straight and try to keep them, in this case, separate, not like the tree of knowledge and the tree of life, if we do try to keep them separate, then there's a value, as far as I'm concerned, in acknowledging that aspect, because it pops up, unfortunately, all over the place, all over through time and space. Evil pops up as pure evil. So we're giving it a name. We named it Esav. Does that answer you a little bit?
Somewhat. It does, but I still think ultimately for me there is a paradox. While you can have a binary understanding of good and evil, I think there's a risk of suggesting that some of these people are Martians. They're not.
Right. I agree with you 1,000%. I think the danger is acute. I think it's a very, very, very hard thing. And that's where what the Zohar says, hopefully, from a certain perspective, tries to mitigate that danger by putting this common source of Esav and Jacob into Isaac. Hopefully, that can a little bit weaken that tendency of literally demonizing that other. Right? So because guess what? We're all God's children. We are actually all God's children. So it's a terrible paradox. You're right. And the paradox has real dangers, real moral and ethical and real life, practical dangers. If we misapply these terms, if we see a Yaakov and we think he's an Esav, then we'll be guilty of being Esav. That's part of what this whole thing is so scary about. Again, this is something that we know in all of our struggles and all of our arguments to this very moment. It's real. This is it's real. It's not Bible fairy tales. The kind of fights that we have in our own country about how we perceive reality are participating in this problem. What's clear to me is the opposite of what's clear to the other person, in fundamental ways, and it makes a difference. It really, really will make a difference, and we can't even agree on which difference is the better difference. Whether my difference is the good difference or their difference is the good difference. But so can we abolish that mode of thinking and say, hey, maybe we'd all live in peace if we could transcend this binary stuff? I don't think so. I think that the reality is too deep. I think that the reality is really too deep. So that's the problem. Let's just read for a second note 13 to conclude these last two lines of this statement.
Note 13.
First, please read the Zohar, the last lines. Or declare all his praise.
Yeah. Or declare all his praise, Jacob. When the sun cleaves to the moon, countless stars radiate from them. When the sun cleaves to the moon. When Tiferet, symbolized by Jacob and the sun, unites with Shekhinah, symbolized by Rachel and the moon, countless spiritual forces or souls issue from them.
Okay, so this is the happy ending, so to speak, of this statement, which is that the potential for light, the potential for surprise, the potential for life is all there, and that's what Jacob represents. That's what Jacob represents, and in that sense, Esau represents death. Right? And that binary will never go away, at least not in the world that we know. All right, we're going to stop here. And to be continued, I hope. Shkoach.
Shkoach.
Go ahead, Rabbi. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Oh.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody. Thank you, Rabbi.
Good night.